So we're going to switch things a bit, and we're going to talk about a bit of medical applications and how AI at UAB, what we are trying to do for different disease aspects. I think one of my colleagues, Dr. Neyra, is going to come after this talk and talk about the kidney and nephrology side of applications as well. So my name is Sandeep, and I'm an assistant professor here. My background is in biomedical engineering and computer science. These are my disclosure. I have a company started up from UAB, spin-off called Spiromatics. So most of our primary research interest in our labs is working on a disease called COPD. How many of you heard about COPD before? Oh, that's good enough. That's all I needed. So COPD, if you don't know anything about it, it's the third leading cause of death after cancer and heart disease. And it's 10th funded in terms of NIH funding as well. So there's a clear discrepancy in terms of how much funding is available to do any kind of research in COPD versus how much mortality is associated with the disease. The breathtaking number, COPD is caused primarily by cigarette smoking. When you smoke for a certain number of years, your lungs are a very solid organ, and they don't give any symptoms for you for a quite bit of time. But by the time you end up coming to the clinic because you have breathing issues, at the time itself, you'll be 30% of your lung is damaged. Given that lungs are so solid, you don't get to diagnose these people early. But unfortunately, there is no treatment for COPD. It's only prevention or management of the disease. So our primary goal is to, how do we find these people early? We know people are smoking. We know people do vaping or other stuff as well. COPD is caused by air pollution, occupational exposures as well. So these are some of the breathtaking numbers. We have close to 370,000 people within Alabama itself that has COPD diagnosed. But again, there is no treatment. There is no drug yet to treat COPD. So just to give much more insight into this, we are only looking at the tip of the iceberg. We don't even know how some of these pathophysiological processes cause COPD. I'm going to go into bit medical terms, but please feel free to ask any questions in between as well. As I said, up to 95% are undiagnosed. 372 million of them, 25 million with COPD in the United States, and out of those 25 million, 75% of them are still undiagnosed. So how do we get these people early to the clinic so that we can manage them better, prevent? So if you ever gone to a lung function test, we feel as a lung disease researchers, this should be a norm whenever you go to a primary clinic, whenever you go to a wellness visit, but nobody does lung function tests. But I think we should do it. That's one of our policy research as well in terms of how do we let primary care start doing lung function tests when you go into the clinic. You come into the clinic and we use a device called spirometer. You blow into that spirometer, it measures how fast you're breathing out. Based on that, they will tell you have COPD or not. If you're within the 1 second, if you're able to breathe out 70% of your air, then you're good. But if you're able to not breathe out anything less than 70%, you have a disease. It could be asthma, it could be COPD or anything. This was invented close to in 60, 70 years back, and it's still the norm right now. And this one single device cannot detect people. And you can see just one curve, one time point, or one data point. So that's where the AI comes in. How do we improve the diagnostics of these things? So COPD is very complex and heterogeneous. The reason why we cannot diagnose people is that it comes in many forms, like cancer. Your lung tissue can get damaged, your airways get narrowed, so you cannot breathe out. Your vasculature, your blood vessels also gets lost or narrowed as well. So there is no one single solution. How do you diagnose? Because COPD, if you smoke 20 years of cigarettes, you might get one of these three or and. So there is we don't know yet what causes what at what time. And this was published in Lancet last year as an overall global policy in COPD diagnosis. As you can see here, even there's the same trends in worldwide as well, especially in China, Southeast Asian countries. COPD is highly prevalent when nobody shows up to the clinic because everybody think taking a cough syrup or just breathing it out for a couple days would be okay, but most of them will have COPD. By the time they show up to the clinic, 50% of their lung is damaged. So I hope I made the case for current diagnosis. Do not capture any kind of changes. You saw one device that's only measuring how your lung function is. It doesn't tell you how much airways are getting narrowed, how much damage is happening to the lungs. You need imaging, you need CT images, you need MR images. So current diagnoses do not capture these early structural and functional changes associated with COPD at all. So where do we come in? So we know that when you go to the hospital for cancer screening or any of the wellness visits, you end up taking CTs, the low-dose cancer screening data sets, or we want to know more about the disease. So we use AI on images and clinical data together to diagnose the disease. So we're trying to come up with a new screening pipeline like you see for cancer screening pipeline for COPD as well. So that's our primary research goal as a center, as a university policy as well. So these are our data, CT images. When you get a CT for lungs, that's all we needed, and the spirometry test that you'll end up getting it, and the demographics and your EHR data, your patient history and all of this. These are the data sources. It's a multimodal AI screening pipeline where you use all of these different types of data to develop screening pipelines. So let's quickly talk about CT. CTs are frequently acquired these days, even though there is radiation dose associated with it. All kind of screening pipelines does do CT. So most of the time you do cardiac CT or whatever it is, you end up seeing the lungs in there. So that's all we needed for the AI model to detect we have COPD or not. So first initial goal we set out to do was, okay, can we detect COPD using CT images directly? We don't need to go to the machine. So if you ever had a scan, like 5 years before, can we use that scan to tell, okay, you might have COPD, but you might want to come back and do regular testing and everything. So it's more of what we call as an opportunistic screening. That's what we tried to do the first time. The problem is when you take a CT, you need to clinician, again, I'm an engineer, I'm not a clinician. So I need a clinician to tell me, these are the features you need to look for to tell somebody has a COPD or not. That process is called radiomics. So it's radiological features. So this is a very big research field, especially in cancer. It's originated from cancer. So we took the radiomics approach where we go to the clinician, show them the CT scan, and tell them, okay, what do you think when you look at this image, what are the features we need to know so that we can diagnose them with COPD or not? So typical radiomics workflow, if you see, you have given an image, and you need to separate the organs. In our case, we have to separate the lungs out. And from the lungs, we show it to the clinician, and the clinician tells us, okay, these are the features you need to calculate, automate that entire process. And using those features from these CT images, we can diagnose somebody has COPD or not. The problem is, how do we segment the lungs from the CT image? That's a big manual, time-intensive, computational-intensive task as well. So first, we set out to write our own algorithms so that we can directly segment these organs from CT images. So we use something called UNet and different kind of advanced deep learning architectures to directly, when you're given a CT, it will give you all the organs in it, segmented to the part. So how does your lungs look? This is a human CT, and your lungs look like this. If you have a lot of COPD, the bottom one is a patient with COPD. You can see the lungs are bulged. The air is getting trapped inside. The lungs are much bigger than a healthy patient. So this is how your lungs going to look. And we developed algorithms. When you're given a CT, we can segment these things automatically. And we have 5 lobes. Human lungs have 5 lobes. Some people wanted to know, where exactly the disease is. So we also provide the lobar segmentation, what we call as. As I said, these are all the blood vessels in your lung, segmented to an accuracy of 2 millimeter as well. This is all using AI models, where you can now see if there's any loss of blood vessels, we can now pinpoint from a baseline scan to a follow-up scan. And we can tell the patient, you're losing blood vessels, so you need to do something with your disease. The problem with all of these things is you need a lot of data for us to train these AI models, and which is a big problem in medical sector. Most of these models are supervised. So we need a lot of data to train this. So we flipped the problem. Okay, why do we need so much data? With all the advances in AI modeling, can we not come up with a model that is like a foundation model, like a ChatGPT can answer any kind of question of any domain? Can we not have that for medical images? So we developed a foundation model where you show any organ in it, based upon the contrast colors or whatever it is, you can see it automatically detects where exactly the lungs are, where exactly the things are. So this is a foundation model we're talking about. So we're taking the GPT approach back to the healthcare, but in a much more cautious, careful way. So this is one of the model work for one of our students in the lab, where if you're given a CT image, this model has never seen a medical image before. It only trained on Google, whatever the open source free images, and it can detect all the airways. This is an airway tree of a human lung on the right side. It can detect everything. It's called zero shot, meaning it never seen a medical image before, but these AI models are so advanced right now, it can detect to that accuracy. Now you can see on the left side is a human annotated ground truth by the clinician, and the right side is a AI derived product. So you can see how well the AI models can do if you're able to train it in a right way. So we released everything, this whole thing to the public. It's available in GitHub. If you know anybody working in pulmonary research, they can go to this website, and it's called Bronch.io. It gets the airways out. You just need to upload the CT scans, and it will give you the airways, and it will give you the dimensions. It will also tell you how wide your airways are, is there any narrowing happening, all the different statistics as well from there. Then we talked about, okay, with all the GPT now, you can talk to images. You say, okay, change the background of this image, it will change the background. So that's how advanced the current GPT models are. So can we do that for medical images? Can the clinician in his desktop use the AI model saying, okay, can you segment the lungs out? And it should be able to, the model should be able to segment the lungs out, whatever he wants, instead of doing the mathematical computation using a natural language-based segmentation. So this is something what we're working on. It's called lung clip, where the user says whatever the organ they want, and it automatically detects in the medical image. So we're taking what's out there and applying back to the medical side as well. This is a bit more complicated, more technical, but most of the segmentation algorithms that are out there doesn't have the right loss function, what we call, to segment these structures, because these are all trained on not medical images. So we're coming up with new ways of detecting blood vessels as well. So as I said, in part of the diagnostic, building a screening pipeline, first of all, we need to segment all the organs. So these are all the things we developed in-house, where for a given CT, you get the lungs, lobes, airways, your rib cage, your heart, everything from one single AI model. So let's go back to the diagnostics. As I said, we did the segmentation now. So what are we going to do with those segmentations? So we're going to go back to the clinician, ask for the features, and trying to diagnose somebody has a disease or not. There are two ways to do this. The top one is the clinician involved, the human in the loop, where clinician tells you, okay, this region is very dark. That means there's a lot of air in the lungs. The bottom approach is completely AI. There is no human in the loop. So we take the CT and test what the clinician features are and what an AI model can it detect automatically by itself. And that's what we did. This was published in Radiology last year, where you see here radiomix approach, the accuracy has increased more than 15 times. So with just using clinician features, we're able to detect COPD, 91% of accuracy at this time. So something like this has never existed before for COPD, because there is no screening pipeline for COPD existed. So with the segmentations, with the clinical input features, we're able to now tell, if you have a CT, lung CT, we can tell 95% of the certainty that you have COPD or not. But as I said, the bottom approach is much more exciting, right? Where you don't even want to go to the clinician to ask for the features every time a CT comes into the system. Can we now use an automated convolutional neural networks and take the human out of the loop and try to see, can we train enough data that we can now just use deep learning instead of using feature extraction. So what we call as a COPD XNet, that has currently been tested, it actually beat the human performance. So now we're able to tell with a given CT without any input from the clinician, just using AI model, we are 92% certain that somebody has COPD or not. So and this works in any kind of, let's say if you go for a lung cancer screening pipeline, we take that low-dose CT scan and we can provide an additional secondary diagnosis that you have COPD or not. And the biggest question people ask us is that, okay, you guys, as I said, I'm an engineer, I'm not a clinician. They'll ask, okay, you're telling me that somebody has a COPD. How is it telling you? It's a black box. I don't know. Can I trust this decision or not? So there's a couple of ways to do that. It's part of the explainability aspect of it, where we use class activation maps, where it will tell you that this is a deep learning model, telling you where exactly which areas it is thinking. Because of that, somebody has COPD or not. So we can provide these maps to the clinicians as well, as to, to build more trust for them to use these AI screening pipelines. So this is all the work that has been done, and the last two things are from UAB, from our group, where we were able to beat all the previous models, and now trying to deploy within the health system as well. So then, once we finished that, the clinicians came to us and asked us, okay, not everybody's going to get a CT. Why would they get a CT? Why would they get a lung CT? Can you not use the same spirometer, the curve that you saw in the beginning? Can we not just use that to tell you, make it more sensitive, than what it is currently doing? So what we did, we took the curve, we applied a one-dimensional convolution neural networks. So when you go to a primary care now, when you give a lung function test, just from the raw data points, from the raw signal, now we can tell more certain whether somebody has COPD or not as well. This is 96% accurate. It's better than the CT model as well. So we're able to build two different data types, two different screening pipelines. Whatever you have in the system, we're able to tell now. So we're able to detect more people that have COPD as well. So we can also give these class activation maps and telling where exactly the diagnosis is coming from as well. So I'm going to highlight for the next 10 minutes or so a couple of other AI projects, but our primary goal is to develop a screening pipeline. We feel like we've done that. Now we're into the process of getting the approvals to be able to deploy it in a health system so that we have much more beneficial, going from a lab to an actual patient as well. So we work on something called medical image synthesis as well as part of the other AI projects, where when you take an MR scan, but MR scan doesn't give you a lot of information on the structure. It only gives you on the function. Can we use AI to generate how does your CT look? That's medical image synthesis. So you don't have to go to another scan. If you have one baseline scan, it could be MR, it could be CT. Can we now generate how your CT, because it's reducing the cost, it's reducing the radiation dose to the patient as well. When you go for a CT, you're going to get radiation. Can we now use AI to tell the clinician, okay, do not set up a follow-up CT. We will use AI to tell you how their CT is going to look like. So if you see here, the second column is actual CT image, and the third column is predicted by the AI thing. So that's how good these AI models are right now. We can actually predict how your CT is going to look like from an entirely different imaging modality. So this has far-reaching implications in terms of medical image acquisition and also in terms of benefits to the patient in cost reduction, radiation dose as well. One of our students working on a new concept called visual language models, where same concept, you talk to the images and you try to interpret directly from the image. So when you look at an image, AI should be able to tell what exactly it's seeing. But this has been done. GPT does this on a natural images, but not has been shown in medical images before. So we're trying to say now, from a given X-ray, can we have this report generated by AI automatically? So for a given CT image, can we generate these reports? Again, this is not using for diagnosis. This is for assistance to the clinician to tell, okay, AI is saying this person has this much interpretation. So it's up to you whether to take it or not. But as an engineers working in the health system, we would like to incorporate as much of AI possible in these areas as well. So some of these things are working with some of the technical details. We can also match the lungs. If you have two different time points, you have an inspiration lung, expiration, we can match and tell how much your lung is expanding or contracting. And we can do that as well. These are some of those examples. If you ever want to see how a airway looks in a ferret, this is how it is. So far, I've been showing the human scans. This is how a ferret. We do ferret research for drug development. And we can use the same AI algorithms to you can see how tall the trachea is. That's how a ferret is as well. So we also do translate some of these AI algorithms to small animal research as well. In the morning session, I was here, most of the approach, I felt like, AI is really good, but we need to take a cautious approach in terms of regulating it, in terms of making sure the privacy concerns, everything is addressed, which is a solid point. There's also another angle to this. We need more AI in the medical side, where that option is still yet to reach a certain level. So, the more AI models, the more open source AI models comes into play, we can take those models and apply it to actually for health benefits or patient detection as well. So, you cannot just, ban all the models, but because there is a lot of good that we can take from these open source models and apply it back to the health systems. So some of these aspects are what we use these airway segmentations that we get out of the CT scan. Then one of the clinicians had this idea of using every airway when you're born with, when you're born, your airways have certain patterns. Can we find these patterns really early? Maybe those patterns, if you have a bad pattern of airways when you're born with it, even if you smoke 10 years of cigarettes, you'll have very severe COPD. But if you have a good pattern of branches of your airways, if you smoke for 10 years, your lungs are still going to be good. So can we find them really young, in teenagers, in that age itself? So that's where it came from, what we call as an airway fractal dimension. This one marker can detect 20% people additionally, whether they have a bad airways or a good airways. So there's so many things that are in downstream that is helping once you have the segmentations from these AI models as well. I just want to leave this with all of you, where the more and more we do these diagnostic pipelines, the more and more realizing that getting medical images is a challenging task. So can we use speech? When you talk to a machine, can we just use your speech to diagnose somebody has a lung disease or not? Are your airways getting narrowed? So this is one example. So this was released by OpenAI, definitely not for public, for obvious reasons. You will know that in a bit. But so there was this patient who had vascular brain tumor. Because of that, she lost her speech. And can we use AI to, to clone her voice and give her speech back? So some of the speech-based diagnostics and everything is based upon these, what we call as a speech-to-text or text-to-speech language models. So one such example is that, so this is a current voice.
Hi everyone, this is what my voice sounds like using open AI new text-to-speech model called.
So this is her current voice, and she lost her speech, and she was a teenager. And OpenAI partnered with a health system and took her voice from her high school days before the surgery. This is the reference voice, only 15 seconds.
Your ingredients together. You are going to put the chopped broccoli and chopped banana peppers inside the bowl. And now this is very adverse. You can use.
So this is the reference audio. They only took 15 seconds of the sample of her voice, and then now we're able to, using AI, able to clone the voice back. So now whenever she talks, she's actually talking in a real voice. So this is after merging both together.
Hi everyone, this is what my voice sounds like using OpenAI's new text-to-speech model called Voice Engine. I was able to use just 15 seconds of a video that I made for a class project to be the reference audio source for the voice you hear right now. What do you think?
I hope this tells you the amazing things we can do with AI right now. And we put everything in a portal right now, so if anybody wants to use this, please reach out to us, and we're happy to share with your health systems as well. And with that, I would like to thank, first of all, the opportunity from MHIBI, the institute, for me to speak here, and the people in my lab, and we're an interdisciplinary people of engineers and clinicians fighting out every day. So with that, I'll take the Q&A after the talk from him. Yeah, thank you.
So thank you very much for the invitation. My name is Javier Neyra. I'm a nephrologist at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. And I'm going to just follow with another case example in the use of AI, in this case applied to kidney care. My disclosures. I'm going to summarize this case example, first of all, with the concepts of what is risk classification, why when we approach patients at different stages in their life and sometimes already with certain signs of disease, it's important to risk classify what we can do with them. What are the phenotypes of the disease and how we can implement preventive or interventions that can treat them. And then the example that we use in dialysis, particularly for patients that are in the hospital already with sick kidneys that require very advanced dialysis types. So acute kidney injury is very frequent. So this is affecting, on average, about 20% of the patients in the hospital. When the patients survive in the first 90 days, they still, 1 out of 4 patients develop what is called acute kidney disease, so a sequela of this injury to the kidneys early on. And then later on, if they still survive for the next 5 years, they still have a risk of developing chronic kidney disease. And this is where you have listened multiple times why the growing prevalence of hypertension, diabetes can affect the kidneys, many patients with chronic kidney disease, and therefore chronic dialysis needs, and a lot of kidney transplant needed for that reason. So some of these consequences are related to different hits on the kidney that can happen multiple times during your life, and sometimes developing this condition that is acute kidney injury. A lot of these patients, unfortunately, die young because they have a lot of cardiovascular disease related to this kidney disease. So when we imagine the sickest patient in the hospital is that patient that, let's say, has an infection, require intensive care unit care, a lot of advanced support with different devices, the mechanical ventilation to support the lungs, and the kidneys are failing. So we have a type of dialysis that is called CRRT. This is a stand for continuous renal replacement therapy. This type of dialysis tries to simulate what the kidney does. So it's going to try to remove toxins from the blood, and it's also going to try to remove excess fluid that the patient has. So that's in principle what the machine is trying to simulate. And of course have some advantages, this particular type of dialysis versus the standard dialysis that we see in outpatients that are more stable when we do it in the hospital. So why is it important to generate risk classification in these patients? Because the precision medicine can allow us to deliver this treatment tailoring specific needs of the patient. So the patient needs a specific removal of certain solutes, or requires more aggressive management of fluids, removing fluids, or not removing fluids, giving the patient back fluids. So precision medicine is very important in general in medicine, but in acute care can be supported by different tools of clinical decision support that can be enabled with different AI tools. So in this particular example I'm going to show later, we're just going to take advantage of the data that is generated when the patient is in the hospital that is recorded in the electronic health records. So this is an example, right? So when we evaluate the data epidemiologically in this particular patient, so sickest patients in the ICU that require this type of dialysis, you can see that the risk of mortality is in the y-axis, and in the x-axis is the amount of fluid that is effectively removed from the patient when the clinicians want to remove fluid. Okay, fluid management is a very key element during your critical illness care in the hospital. So you can see that if the patients have a lot of fluid on board, so to the right side in the x-axis, and with the color red there in the dots, the risk of mortality starts going up. Why this is important? Because in these particular patients that the kidneys are failing, clinicians are actively removing fluid with the device, right? So guiding clinicians to do it more effectively can certainly have an impact on patient care, and particularly in mortality in this example. Now, you can use different types of models, of machine learning models, to try to use certain parameters that are collected continuously in these patients. For example, the blood pressure parameters related to the hematocrit, that is the concentration of the red blood cells in the blood, and the serum creatinine as well, that is a marker that we use to measure kidney function. So these parameters are continuously collected for clinical care, so you can use some of that EHR data to analyze certain phenotypes of patient trajectories and therefore guide clinicians to make better decisions. Now, in addition to that, to what's collected in the EHR for clinical care, so remember the EHRs were developed based on administration needs of the healthcare systems to be able to bill to the insurance. It was not created as a tool necessarily that is friendly with the end user, that is the clinician, right? Or for the patient. But now it has some adaptations, but it collects a lot of important data. Also, the devices that we use collect a lot of data. So if there is a lot of young people in the audience interested in AI tools in healthcare, that's a very nice area of a lot of opportunity, because the ventilator, the dialysis device, collect continuous data every minute that has been completely underutilized to treat patients. Because the clinicians, like me, at the bedside, we don't need it. We need certain patterns of recognition, but perhaps it's time where the access to this data can inform that this data can also help in the phenotyping and the care of these patients. So for example, the dialysis machine, just in particular, has programmatic data and therapy data. What is programmatic data? Is therapy related to the filter life, the time on the machine, the treatment loss, complications on the machine related to the catheter that we use to provide the treatment, or clotting on the machine. And then therapy data, what the clinicians are prescribing in terms of dose, and what the clinicians are prescribing in terms of fluid removal for the patient. And using these two components, you can create different algorithms using machine learning, deep learning models, and you can start creating predictions more close to real time that can help in the management of these patients. So in concept, EHR data, just in this example, combined with CRRT machine data, it seems like an easy task, but it's not that simple. Why? Because the EHR in the United States is fragmented, right? We don't have uniform electronic health record systems. So we need to build data pipelines that really are scalable to capitalize on that EHR data. Because it doesn't matter to create a tool that is only relevant for certain institutions, right? We want to create tools that can be generalizable and scalable and can serve the population really that is in need of these tools. Integration of the data, validation of these tools, and of course harmonization of all these data parameters that can have different sources of being collection, it's very relevant. Now, for this reason, we need informatic tools to monitor the treatment. We need also utilization case examples of these tools for quality improvement and to target specific interventions in patient care. And also, we need to really enhance the concepts both in the informatics side and in the clinician side of how this tool can be implemented, right? So another area I will recommend young people in the audience to look into is implementation science, right? You can have a very fantastic group of engineers developing a tool, but a complete gap in how that tool can be applied at the bedside. Now, this is another area where can be further assistant use using these algorithms to create dynamic monitoring, right? So different to what Sandeep covered earlier, when you are trying to predict outcomes in a population that is chronic COPD, here you have minutes sometimes to make decisions, right? So, and to help that, you can imagine clinicians rounding on 40, 50 patients a day. Their decisions may be tailored in their sickest patients than maybe 10 or 15. But if you create dashboards that are dynamic, that can summarize certain type of data, and that can guide specific decisions that can be tested, that will be a way to augment clinical decision capacity and therefore patient care. And this is an example on a dashboard that already exists. This is a dashboard that they use in Cincinnati Children's, for example. And in the bottom right, you can see the fluid management of the patient. You can aggregate, you can visualize for a specific patient about how the fluid removal is in terms of the prescription, and therefore make adjustments. So the use of artificial intelligence for risk classification of phenotyping definitely can help. So in the right side of the slide here, you can see how we practice medicine these days. So this is what I'm going to do starting Saturday that I start my ICU service. I use the electronic health record data, and I use the clinical evaluation of the patient. This evaluation is sporadic because I'm not continuously looking at the EHR. you sometimes has incomplete data because by the time I need something, maybe it's still pending the laboratory parameter, or maybe I don't have the result of the test I'm expecting, even the CT of the chest that Sandeep was using for the COPD. And it's not integrated with my clinical workflow, right? How I prioritize what I need to do is not necessarily integrated with how these results are going to appear available in the EHR. So that's how we make decisions. So if you are lucky, everything is ready when you are ready to make the decision, and if not, that decision can be delayed if the elements are not present at the time you're ready to make it. But we can combine these things with informatic tools now to combine different sources of data. So multimodal data, not only from the EHR, imaging that was described nicely earlier, the monitors that we have in these patients with continuous data and the data that is collected in the devices, and also all these extracorporeal support tools that we use in the particular ICU in this example. So we can use these machine learning tools to integrate this data, create these pipelines, and also include risk classification, subphenotyping of the patients that can help make the decisions more dynamic using higher level of data and integrate it in the clinical workflow, right? So that's why it's important to partner in the engineer side with the clinician side, because you can create the best tool, but it's not useful at the bedside. So you need to understand the needs on that side. So if you're a programmer, you need to go and you want to create a solution in healthcare, you need to understand healthcare, not only with what you read or what you heard in class or what the discussions you heard. You need to go there, round with the clinicians, and interpret their needs with your own experience, right? Because you're trying to create a solution that doesn't exist, right? So you cannot follow an algorithm that say, okay, this solution will be built this way to this way. There are many things in between that you need to experience to be able to create something innovative. So, and solutions help, right? So this is, for example, a study, like when you integrate data, it can help the clinicians, right? So a lot of the time they say, well, you have a sophisticated algorithm, the AUC, it's 0.9, but it is really useful. It can really change a patient care to the point that we can save some patients from progression of disease or from certain outcomes like mortality, for example. So when we talk about dialysis in patients that are acutely sick, there is you can just aggregating this information into a tool that in this case was called AKI SCA-MP that basically compile all the data available and remind clinicians that, well, to make a decision about starting a patient on dialysis, you probably should consider these electrolyte parameters and these fluid parameters. So just using that, a simple tool, not AI generated, clinicians were able to make better decisions in terms of which patients not to offer the treatment because the prognosis was so poor. And this is another important aspect. In healthcare, sometimes the best decision for the patient is not to do nothing because you're going to create more harm by doing certain interventions sometimes. So sometimes the decision is to give that patient proper comfort and transition to palliative care for end of life than trying advanced procedures. So that's typically when we start dialysis in patients in the ICU, typically there is about 5 to 10% of patients that will die in the first 24 hours. And that's epidemiologically, not only at UAB, everywhere in the world that provide advanced care with this type of dialysis. So on some of those patients, you can argue that in some, we may rush our decision, or we were not sure, or we didn't have enough information to tell the family that we should not offer the treatment because it's creating more harm with very little chance of success. So here, this tool, just compiling this information, make clinicians make better decisions on this side to reduce the use of dialysis in patients where the treatment should be considered futile. And of course, you can create different type of deep learning model. This is a study from our group. We use a data set that is available publicly, that is the Mimix4. We use an LSTM model with MLP, and we were able, you can see in an individual case example, to predict the mortality of the patient approximately about between 36, 48 hours before the event happened. And you can do this very successfully using different types of data that is collected in the EHR. This has been reproduced. The AUCs are around 0.78, 0.82, not perfect, but remember what I said, these tools are intended to augment clinical decision capacity, not to replace, so are intended to be used by clinicians and not to replace clinician decisions. So this is another example of these models in a patient that survived. You can see how dynamically the risks start going down. In a patient that died, the risks go up. Right? So these dynamic predictions can be made, but the question is how we can use them and how we can create really solutions that can really assist needed decisions at the bedside. Of course, we have problems because when we generate this data and these examples, I said we use a data set that is a MIMIX4. MIMIX4 may not represent a patient population in South Alabama, for example, right? It's a population from a hospital in Boston. So how we can create access to different types of data from different representation of patient populations, harmonize that, and then start evaluating our deep learning models, right? So later on in the discussion, we're going to ask Sandeep what's the representation of that population. He has developed those fascinating models of deep learning to assess these CT scans, right? Because if I see myself, a Hispanic, 40-year-old individual, and I don't see a group like me represented in those models, so how I can trust those type of solutions, right? And of course, this is a good example in nephrology, a partnership between Google DeepMind and the US veteran hospital system. As I said, the EHR is fragmented in the US, but one of the harmonized systems is at the VA. So, and the VA has the data across all the US, right, on the veterans. So in this partnership, they were able to create machine learning models that can predict the risk of kidney failure in the hospital with certain good level of accuracy, but every time the prediction was accurate once, it has 2 false positives, right? So, of course, if you ask a clinician like me, are we going to implement this in your hospital? I will tell every nephrologist and intensivist will resign if they have a false positive alert twice the time you will detect one potential case, right? So that's why this is not a solution that is, but it's at least proved the concept that you can create dynamic prediction with complex data like in the EHR, and with good partnership, this can be advanced towards further validation. So I'm going to end. I think we're good with time, but I'm going to put another example related to the machine data, right? So the machine, if you remember, and I hope at least 1 or 2 people got excited about what the dialysis machine does. So the dialysis machine cleans the blood from different toxins in your blood and remove fluid. But to clean the blood, we use a filter. That filter is trying to simulate the filtration in the kidney, right? But that filter has certain properties, and there are different type of filters that are very sensitive to different type of solutes. So the machine, during the monitoring of the treatment, will measure the pressure across the filter continuously. And this is what is in the y-axis, the transmembrane pressure. So you can see this was data from during the COVID-19 pandemic involving 85 patients that were critically ill in the intensive care unit, required continuous dialysis, and we evaluated close to 20,000 hours of treatment. So you can see that the pressure in the filter in a patient in which we use a filter very specialized to remove more inflammatory molecules is very different than the pressure in the filter with a standard use of filters that don't remove this extra inflammation, right? So this is interesting, right? Because it separates really that in certain patients, you can remove more inflammatory mediators. But when you look into this aggregated data, it looks very different. But if you just focus on those patients in which we are removing more inflammatory mediators, you can see that there is a lot of heterogeneity. These are individual patients there. So not every patient responds the same to the treatment with the filter to remove inflammation, right? So this is important to recognize because the patients biologically may respond very different to treatment. And this type of phenotyping using this type of data that in the past was not available, right? In the past, you just have a cross-sectional evaluation of those pressures when the clinician is at the bedside, right? And that's it. That's all you have. You don't have a trend like this. So this can help to enrich phenotypes for patient detection and also to create smart trials in which you can target specific treatments, let's say in this case the type of filter with dialysis for specific patients that may need it and also may respond differently or better to the intervention. And this phenotyping has two concepts, the prognostic enrichment. We want to detect patients that can have worse outcomes. So we can intervene both ways, either with advanced care or with palliative care. And also we want to predict patients that can respond differently to different interventions, right? So this is the part in medicine that couples very nicely with personalization of medicine. Right? So this is kind of the area we need help, right? From all the people that want to build the skills using deep learning tools to create solutions in healthcare, this predictive enrichment is what's missing and where we need help, right? So identify, this is a patient that not only I can predict your COPD development, but I can institute this type of treatment to mitigate that progression, right? So that's how we want to practice medicine, hopefully, in the future. So phenotypes are also dynamic, right? That's the other complexity. You can classify a phenotype right now, but let's say, right? So I think the example of the CT images was very nice because it's a long-term progression of a disease, right? And if you detect it early on, maybe you detect a patient with certain susceptibility, but the exposures that that patient may have throughout the next 10 years may be very different. And phenotypes may be dynamic in a way that will change in terms of risk prediction and probability of developing progression of the disease. So this is something to keep in mind when we talk about phenotyping certain diseases. And finally, just keep in mind that healthcare is very complex, but data is available. Now, when we evaluate a patient, it's not only what I see in the electronic health record, and when the patient can talk with me in the clinic, not being sick in the hospital, the information that the patient provides. We can access the genetic variants of the patient to identify certain risk predisposition. We can access also the clinical data of the patient with all these tools. We can access the pathobiological signals of the patient measuring certain biomarkers of disease, personalization, and progression. And importantly, we can determine the risk of the patient also based on exposures like social determinants of health, environmental exposures that are very relevant these days, and also the probability of these patients to respond differently to different treatments. So it's very fascinating how this data now is available. And there may be someone here working on geospacing risk classification of patients. So how the patient, where it lives, right, can affect the probability of developing a chronic condition like chronic kidney disease or COPD, right? And what happened, right? Because we said it's dynamic, right? What happened, a patient that lives all the time in certain location, exposed to certain temperatures or certain type of water, and then relocate multiple times in the US versus a patient that stay in a single location. Very interesting. So this is how we're gonna practice, hopefully in the near future. And of course, the use of AI is part of the solutions for the puzzle, but it's not the only solution. The solution is gonna be how we work together to use these tools and implement them in the particular solutions that they were developed for. This is just an example of some smart solutions we're developing at UAB. If you have more interest in this type of solutions, you can talk with me later, or you can send me an email. But yeah, so this all I talk about how to enhance dialysis care in the hospital in particular. It's a partnership that we're doing with UAB and this company that is called Dialytics. It's a spin-off of UAB focusing on AI-enabled solutions, creating these dashboards, more dynamic risk prediction, and integration, harmonization of data pipelines. Very good. Thank you very much for your attention.
All right. I am very interested in the screening for the COPD. I think that's wonderful. Do you ever look at the rates of false negatives?
Yeah, we do. That's why it mostly is a secondary diagnosis for them to get a test. So most of the times, as I said, lungs are damaged. They're really strong. We don't have the symptoms. Most of them are asymptomatic. So if we can tell that, okay, this person might have COPD, even if it's a false positive, at least they will go for a lung function test. That will determine, okay, these lungs are bad, or get us another CT scan.
What percentage are you finding?
Around 6 to 8%. Yeah.
You're talking about diagnosis of chronic kidney disease. And I have a question. If someone were to go into the emergency room, and maybe it's a health system that has a patient portal, and so you can see all their diagnoses, and they're in and out of the emergency room with chronic illness and that kind of thing, and they're never really identified as a chronic disease patient. Are the hospitals using AI in any way to take all that data of these multiple visits to finally decide, well, maybe this patient needs to seek further treatment?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is not systematically used, right? As you know, the EHR system is fragmented. If it's a patient that used the, let's say, a VA system or a Mayo Clinic system or a UAB system, you can have access through the EHR to all the records the patient had in different clinics that are affiliated. But yeah, the patient may go to a completely different healthcare system, and we're missing the opportunity to capitalize on that data to identify a patient early at risk. That's not integrated. Now, that being said, a good angle that has been developed as a solution is the patient empowerment, right? So as a patient, and these solutions already exist with different companies, you will allow the healthcare systems you interact with to share the data through you. So you are the honest broker of your data. And through that tool, you can create dashboards for clinicians that are in the outpatient setting, and they will have access to all those kidney function markers that the patient had throughout the interaction with different healthcare systems. Right? So, but, and again, during the morning, there were talks about data confidentiality and security, and yeah, creating secure environments that can facilitate this data transfer and use. It's relevant, right? Because you can imagine a doctor in rural Alabama not having access to different EHRs. And then, but if through the patient, that doctor can visualize the trajectory of kidney function throughout the last 5 years, that will certainly impact how that doctor will take care of that patient. So I think that's an important area. It's not fully resolved, but there's people working on those solutions. A lot of the time, not integrating with end users. So if any of you is planning those solutions, you need to create a team that has the right stakeholders. So to really tackle the problem, right? So for a reason, those big companies working on AI, they always shake with healthcare, right? Healthcare is very respected, right? Why there's no more investment in healthcare with this type of solutions, right? So they always think twice. Or they try, like one example for Amazon Health, right? Amazon Alexa, they wanted to branch a health specific portfolio, and then they back down, right? I mean, there's very smart people there. Why they do it, right? So why we don't have more investment on AI solutions in healthcare?
Over here. When you guys talk about using AI to diagnose people, does the medical industry give a lot of pushback?
I think insurance would love it, but medical industry pushback, it's about that false positive, getting the right FDA approvals and everything to be able to deploy the screening things. It is regulated in a way. I would say right now you're going to see more. It's inevitable. I think it's going to be part of a lot of health systems. I don't think there's going to be a lot of pushback moving forward with all the advances in AI and the trust we're trying to build in the community itself on AI and the use of AI itself.
Yeah, and I will give you an example, right? So the probability of harm is always a possibility, right? Because you are not talking about manufacturing a vehicle here, right? An electric car. We're talking about a patient that could die with a false alarm, with a false phenotyping, with a false diagnosis, with a false intervention. So in the case of detecting acute kidney injury that is based on tracing kidney function markers, there has always been the development of alerts, for example, how to alert clinicians that the patient has kidney problems so clinicians can operate. can action it. So when there was a nice clinical trial done with one nice alert that used data in the EHR across different centers, this was in the northeast of the US, and involved academic, non-academic centers, right? Typically, by definition, a non-academic center tend to be a smaller center with less beds and no trainees. So they noticed first that the alert didn't change the patient outcome in terms of kidney disease progression. Number one. Number two, they noticed a signal of harm in hospitals that were non-teaching, right, with the alert. So that's the part we should not underestimate. What even a simple solution like an alert can create to maybe push towards unnecessary interventions that can harm patients at one side. On the other side, they can also burn out the clinicians. You want a clinician that is functional for 8-10 hours a day. You don't want that clinician that at 3 p.m. in the afternoon is not able to make the right decisions for the patients, right? So, and believe me, in healthcare there are already thousands of alerts, and a lot of them are driven by administration needs. So not by the needs of the patient. So that's why you need to balance that. So when you say industry will always be very cautious about development and deploying any of these solutions and that are not already approved by the regulatory entities to be in use in patients, because there is a lot of potential suits that can come from the use of these tools inappropriately.
So I had a question about, you guys were talking a lot about generative and how it's important to pick a data set that accounts for a lot of different people. But I was wondering if in a case where it's like lung disease, for instance, and there could be environmental factors like how much air pollution is in a region, is it more of a priority to get people that match like gender, race, ethnicity, or is it more important to gather like geographical region based on air pollution, just like as you're considering that?
Yeah, great question. So the data sets or the diagnostic screening pipelines that we've been training on, it's like close to 10,000 patients from different multi-center data across different geographical regions of United States. And that accounts for race, gender disparity, all of. So it's like a gold mine for lung disease data sets called COPD gene. But it's not in terms of for air pollution that's designed for cigarette smoker-based study. So the main inclusion criteria was these number of years you need to have cigarette smoking done, then you're part of that study. So we don't have specific data sets for air pollution-based or occupational exposures. There are some cadmium-based exposure studies that in Alabama that are part of UAB that are working on a separate, entirely different data set. So if you apply this algorithm on that data set, it's not gonna, I would say, as an engineer developing these algorithms, I would be worried. But it's a chicken and egg problem. How much data you can collect. Data collection is really hard, especially in healthcare, and we have to start somewhere in that sense. But I do. One of the limitations is that the diversity of the data sets. Yes.
And I would encourage that type of research because now you have more available census data. So in the EHR, remember, we capture the patient address, the zip codes. So you can link that zip code to the patient census report and then identify certain classifiers of social determinants of health, right? The area deprivation index, how rural that area is. And these parameters already we recognize in healthcare that can influence disease incidence and progression. So it has been completely underutilized, right? So if I see myself as a patient and I interact with an electronic health record, I want the electronic health record to phenotype me completely, right? So what's my genetic predisposition? If I ever had any type of opportunity to have genetic tests, I want that to be available. I want to capture my exposure to different environmental factors through my zip codes where I have lived. And also I want to capture individual level SDOH metrics to be able to phenotype me in addition to the biological signals I developed throughout my blood testing and all evaluations I have with an electronic healthcare system, right? So yeah, absolutely. So I think patients should be empowered to start paying attention to those details and discussing with their doctors. Hey, doctor, I used to live in this area that have this level of air pollution that is above average in the country, right? So these conversations are very important, so clinicians start to recognize the need to start integrating this in clinical care, right? Not only from the research side, that Sandeep maybe wanted to integrate that parameter into the models, right, will be fascinating, right? But then how we can create sustainability in the use of this data, I think the patients need to be part of the partnership of developing these real solutions, right?
I'll just add to that saying, as part of this AI modeling, when we get the segmentation of these airway trees and stuff, one of the other stuff that comes out of this is one of the biomarkers I mentioned, the fractal dimension biomarker. So there's more research that can be used with having an AI model because, you take out the burden in terms of segmenting these parts or whatever it is. During that process, we also found out that women have thinner airways than thicker airways, and they have different exposure to disease rates as well. So some of these are possible because we're able to automate that process. Previously, we didn't have time to think about those questions at all. So at a research side, it has multiple benefits. In terms of the deployment, as Javier pointed out, that there's still risks involved. Yeah.
As someone who currently works in cohorts with Marshall Space Flight Center, who works directly with astronauts on the ISS, has this research been considered to be used for long-term expeditions like to the moon to detect any diseases to outcome during the flight because data takes so long to track back, especially when it gets to the moon?
Yeah, I think like the partnership between healthcare research and research in the space level has already shown that you can assist with phenotyping certain diseases, right? I particularly don't work in any project that involve any collaboration with the Space Center and the Space Center research. But I think for this particular center and the proximity with UAB, it will be nice to explore those type of partnerships with different type of diseases. Right here, we presented 2 examples of kidney disease and lung disease in different settings, right? But there are, during that expedition to the space, there are certainly the human body is exposed to certain extremes in certain that can be somehow a human lab where we can learn a lot for what's happening in diseases that we explore with patients here. So I think that's an important area to further develop in terms of partnership, I think, in particular with UAB. I don't know if you work with the Space Center.
No, not in that area. I think the closest we've worked is the lung function. How does your lungs behave when you're at high altitudes, especially in the mountainous areas, Denver, the people, hikers, athletes, how their lung function changes with behavioral aspects and also their training aspects. That's the closest we have been to, but not definitely, that's the moonshot, I guess. Yeah.